Welcome back to Tide Pod on the YouTube home of Tide Illustrated. Jack Knowlton, Tony Sukalis back with more hoops and football news. We're in full off-season mode in both football. At least we get, some product to actually consume on the field, which we're obviously excited this week. Have a practice viewing and, of course, A-Day coming up next Sunday. So plenty of stuff we'll have on Tide Illustrated in the build-up to that. But on the basketball front, Tony, it's been an eventful few weeks, days of player acquisition and player reacquisition for Alabama men's basketball. Tide trying to fill out its roster. Obviously, the transfer portal open right now until April 22nd. And that's where we're going to start because Alabama now has 3 portal additions. In fact, the day we're recording this on Sunday, you gracious listeners are listening on Monday, so you will have already seen this news. But Jalil Bethea has become the 3rd edition for Alabama basketball this offseason, just committed on Sunday. Transfer from Miami, was a freshman last season, averaged about 7 points, okay shooting splits, about 2 rebounds and 1.2 assists per game. Not the most exciting stat line, did play for a very topsy-turvy Miami team that lost its coach midway through the season and was at one point a 5-star recruit in the class of 2024. I think the number 7 player overall, according to Rivals. So Alabama gets him. And then since the last time we spoke, they also added Taylor Bowen, another ACC transfer coming from Florida State. The forward, about 8 points per game, 5.5 rebounds, and about 1.5 blocks as well. The most notable thing with him, too, at 6'10", shot about 41% from 3 on relatively low volume, but very decent shooting efficiency there. So, Tony, just talking solely about the transfers, just what do you make of these 3 guys? We obviously talked about Noah Williamson as well too on a previous show, the guy from Bucknell, the center, but Bethea and Bowen coming in the fold now. That's 3 transfers for Alabama. Feels like 3 pretty good, additions in terms of length, defensive help, shooting, kind of all things Nate Oates is looking for. I think these guys check a lot of boxes.
Yeah, I was going to say length. You've got a 7-foot center. You've got a 6'10" power forward that can shoot the ball really well. And then Bethea is a 6'5" guard that defends pretty well, as in terms of he didn't shoot great last year. What did he shoot, like 30% from 3 or something like that? But he can shoot the 3. I think he probably, like you mentioned, is going to put up better offensive numbers in this system than he did as a freshman, just because of the, like you said, the topsy-turvy situation that he was in Miami. But he's another, bigger guard. That's what we were saying, is that Alabama is going to bring in these bigger guards. You're not going to necessarily have your Chris Youngblood, your Mark Sears. I think, you mentioned it, and I think it's a good point. You go up against that big Duke team, and it kind of opens your eyes a little bit towards what you need for the season. And I think some of these acquisitions too should be able to play some good defense. And Taylor Bowen's going to give you more of an inside presence in that regard in terms of blocking shots. Bethea is going to be not just a guard that can shoot, but a guard that can defend. And so I think you're kind of answering some of the problems that you had last season. I think you're kind of growing from an aspect of Nate Oates kind of, he knows what it takes to build a contender. Now he's trying to find what it takes to build that championship level team, and it's not all, let's find the best scorers. I think he's learning from his, I don't even want to say mistakes, but he's filling the holes that he had last season. I think, you've seen that the last 2 off seasons where they didn't have a big, and, they brought in Cliff Amore, and even that wasn't the best fit. Now he has, obviously I think that Aiden Sherrill is going to be the starting center, but you bring in a guy in Noah Williamson, who I think is more of a fit for the system, even more so than Cliff was, even if he's not as good as a backup. So I like what he's doing. I think he's building together a really good, not just his team, but a team that's, built to win a title, built to win a tournament, and that's going to be able to, not have a lot of weaknesses to exploit.
Yeah, I think that the interesting thing, is I think when you add this kind of length and you have more of a balance or I guess less of a discrepancy maybe in height across your lineup, is I think nowadays it allows you to do more things. I mean, we just watched the Final Four on Saturday night, and to me the theme between all 4 of those teams was that they had a lot of length, a lot of versatility, guys who could defend 1 through 5 and guard multiple positions. And I don't think Alabama quite had that. I think for as great as Mark Sears is, I think it can sometimes be difficult to build a team around that, especially, when he was having a down year shooting the ball, which obviously, no one was really going to foresee that. But, not to take away from what Mark Sears has done. But yeah, I think you're getting taller, and that is a real significant thing, as simple of a concept as it is. And I think, yeah, there is a theme with these three guys. And, now you look forward and you'll see what else potentially Alabama might go to, because, there's some roster shakeup or things that happened on its own team from last year. And you obviously had four guys as well in the last few days announced that they're coming back, including Aiden Sherrill, which, was pretty expected, but still a big piece, obviously going to step up in his role at the center spot. He announced he's coming back. Aiden Holloway, the Auburn transfer, is coming back. And then you have the two guys who got cleared for their red shirts, Houston Millette and Latrell Wrightsell, two guys, again, who add to that guard room. Didn't play that much last season, were probably missed at times. I know certainly Alabama would have loved to have had Latrell for his 3-point shooting. And so you have those guys in the mix. But on the flip side of that, another guy out the door. You have two now for Alabama. Obviously, Nas Cunningham entered the portal, and then Mouhamed Dioubate as well, which is, I think, really the thing to ask about here, because what you're getting to an extent with those four returners. But Dioubate, obviously a fan favorite. Tony, I know, we're both big Mouhamed Dioubate fans. I mean, how could you not be watching him last year? How much does that sting for Alabama? And were you surprised at all by that news? Just give me your reaction to him being on his way out. And Alabama obviously has a lot of grit to replace with his exit.
I'm a huge Mo Dioubate fan, so I love watching him play. I just like the way he plays basketball. So it does kind of, I'm going to miss watching his style on the court. I will say that like each team is different, and maybe this team that Alabama is building, he's not as much of a necessity. Like I said, they are getting bigger, so maybe you can compensate that. Maybe you can go more guard heavy with bigger guards. That might make more sense. But I do think they're going to miss, Mo's blue collar, aspect of it. Be interesting to see what they do with the power forward position if they bring in another person. If they don't, I think you're going to have to see somebody like Jaron Stevenson really grow up and really kind of, be more of that inside presence. Because Jaron Stevenson's a player that has all the talent in the world. But, I think he is a guy that probably needs to, start playing like, a veteran and also start playing like a man, like a grown man, like doing some more of that blue collar toughness stuff under the, not to say that Jaron's not a blue collar player, but more of that, robust toughness under the basket that Mo was able to do. I think that's going to be tough to replace. You do got Taylor Bull-Bowen. I think he can do a lot of that. There's some guys that they're interested in the portal, and also you got to get Jaron to come back. That hasn't happened yet. I think you really, until they announce that they're coming back, I don't think you can really say that they're going to be a part of the team. So that's another thing they have to do. I'm a little bit interested. When I look at this team, I look at, now you definitely need to replace that scrapper that what Mo Dioubate was. And the other thing too is I think you kind of need a point guard depending on what happens. But I like the roster they're building. I think Diabate is a big loss. But I have a feeling, and I'm not even trying to downplay him as a player. He's going to make somebody extremely happy wherever he goes in the portal. I have a feeling that the value that he provided on this team might not equal the value that he would have provided on the next, like this coming team. On this, the value provided on, let me rephrase that, on this past team might not be as high as the value that he would have had on this future team. And I think for a guy like Mo, you're trying to be the next Herb Jones. I think he wants to find a place where he can be a certified starter, a certified guy that gets, 25, 30 minutes a game. I don't know if he's going to get that at Alabama. And so I can kind of see it from him. Probably he's going to get a big NIL package somewhere, probably going to get a starting role somewhere. And, it might make sense for both sides.
Yeah, for sure. There could be, you have for every Rylan Griffin transfer to Kansas, there's a Nick Pringle to South Carolina where, he was able to take on a little bit of a bigger role and have some more success. So we'll see what happens with his front there. But you mentioned replacing that. It's going to be interesting how they do that, whether it's collectively or with another transfer in. And that's a good place to segue is I think it's fitting at this point to maybe do some lineup hypotheticals because, we now stand with Alabama's roster They have 13 spots filled. Now, under the current rules, that's the maximum you can have, which is 13 scholarship players. They are trying to change the rule to allow for up to 15 just roster spots, and it eliminates scholarships. That's just how many people you're allowed to have on your team maximum. To me, it would seem a little bit strange to max that out. I think 15 guys is a lot. I mean, you look at NBA rosters that are that size, and even those guys don't, cycle in and play. I think that would be a lot of minutes to manage. So working kind of with that 13 number, you've obviously got the 3 freshmen, Davion Hannah, Amari Allen, London Jemison. You now have 3 transfers in Bulbo and Williamson and Jalil Bethea. And then you have these 4 returners, which leaves kind of 3 guys with things up in the air. You talked about Jaron, Darion Reed's the other one, and LeBaron Philon, who have not announced their plans yet either way, whether it's transfer, NBA draft, coming back. They have not decided yet. So for this exercise, let's cast those 3 aside. And when you look at just these 13 players, what is a lineup that you build? And I'll allow the whole, guy isn't in the portal yet situation too, if there's someone you think they might bring in if things shake up elsewhere. But when you look at that group, these 13 players that Alabama currently has, and then kind of the pending situations with Reed, Stevenson, and Philon, what's kind of a lineup you build, whether or not you factor those 3 in?
Yeah. Look, if you don't return Philon, which I mean, I think it's probably a coin flip in terms of his pro potential. I mean, if he gets a team that's going to invest in him, he should go. So that's an interesting thing. There's not a lot right now. Your point guard, if the season started tomorrow, would be Aiden Holloway, and your backup in terms of the people that have committed, I guess, would be Latrell Wrightsell. Would that be your backup point guard?
Mm-hmm.
That's not great. I think so. That's the thing that I think that Alabama should really target is they got to bring in somebody that can distribute the ball. The thing that they'll be missing from LeBaron is not necessarily his scoring or his defense, it's his assists. I mean, he was a guy that was getting, him and Mark at the end of the season were getting 6-7 assists a game. That's going to be difficult to replace with the current people that are coming back that have already announced. So we're not using LeBaron, I guess, in this scenario, right? Mm-hmm. Is that what we're doing? I would go, I kind of want to see it in front of me, but I would go Aiden Holloway, Latrell Wrightsell. Would you go? I think currently I might go Bethea. Then Taylor Bulbo and then Aiden Sherrill. I guess that's what I would go with. What I currently have. Am I forgetting someone? Is that I don't expect that lineup.
The one I would swap if we're working without a LeBaron Philon would be I would probably put Houston Millett in over Bethea just because he has the experience. He was here last year. I would think, you could bring a Bethea in off the bench. I think he could still be effective. But either one is fine. You have a longer guard who can score and play defense. That's kind of that's what you're looking for off ball. And I think you're exactly right. The domino to fall here for me, yes, if a Darion Reed and a Jaron Stevenson leave, if it's both of them, I wonder if maybe Alabama still looks into just replacing both those dudes with one guy. Not that, you're going to get the combined output from just one guy, but I think, you can get a like for like replacement potentially for those two. The big domino for me here, I think you're absolutely right, is LeBaron and what he does, because you have to replace a super big creative playmaking need. It's great that you're adding all these lengthy shooters, but you got to have someone who can pass them the ball. You have to have a guy who can score a little bit himself, and obviously a guy who can play defense as well, because when I look at a lineup with, say, Aiden Holloway in it, I want to surround him with a little bit more defense. I'm still not totally sold on him as an elite defender. I think he's had his moments and made some good plays against BYU actually in the tournament that I liked. But I think you're spot on. I think the thing I go back and forth with, if you don't have LeBaron Philon, is do you put Latrell Wrightsell in there? But I think the other 4 for me is concrete. I think you have Holloway in that lineup. I think for me, I have Houston Millett in that lineup, and then I think it's Bulbo and Sherrill in the front court.
Actually, looking back, if we're just going off of that lineup, I don't think you do have Latrell. Latrell's coming off an injury. I think he at this point he is your backup point guard, so you don't want to put both of your point guards. If you right now you only have 2 point guards, they so need a guy that can distribute the ball. So yeah, I think at that point, yeah, maybe you don't start Latrell. He'd get a lot of minutes though, for sure.
Yeah, and then you kind of look at the bench department for me. I think you have Latrell, you have Bethea, you have a guy in Noah Williamson who can come in and be that reserve big, and then from there it's probably one of the three freshmen who it's worth noting. Nate Oates kind of sees all three of them. They all have pretty similar builds as guys who can handle the ball and play kind of like that bigger guard position. So that's important too in terms of when you're looking at the depth and who they have to add. But yeah, I think the next big domino here for me, Tony, is LeBaron, what his decision is. And if he comes back, I think you don't see as much movement from Alabama in the portal at that point, other than if it's replacing a one of Reed or Stevenson. Otherwise, I think your next big splash is adding that point guard, that guy who can bring the ball up for you, set things up for some of the shooting around him. But in terms of adding the length in the front court, I think your business is pretty well in shape. Like we keep saying, they could get a replacement for Reed or Jaren, but if you bring one or both those guys back, those are perfectly adequate bench front court guys. I mean, Darion, I think, has even higher potential than that, but I think their front court is pretty well settled, even with the loss of Dioubate. Just as long as if Reed or Stevenson goes, if one of them does go, you get that replacement there.
Yeah, I wonder too, when you look at the acquisitions that they've got, I wonder if they have a decent feeling that maybe LeBaron is coming back, because I feel like they're not necessarily acting like a team desperate for a point guard right now, and that's just kind of interesting in terms of some of the names we're hearing, some of the targets. Because really, you look at our hot board, is there even a point guard on there of the names that we've heard Alabama being
definitely
linked
not
to?
one that can give you what LeBaron has given you.
I mean, like Jaron Pierre Jr. is going to be one of the guys that if they have a shot at him, he's going to be a big time prospect. But he's not necessarily a point guard. He had 3.8 assists last season for Jacksonville State a game. He led them in assists, but I think that I wouldn't call him a point guard. So putting him in that slot might not even be the answer if Alabama even was able to get him.
Yeah, I think it's worth saying too, as quick as this portal period goes, there is a chance that maybe there is a guy who is not in the portal yet or not yet on Alabama's radar that could end up being their guy. I think there's still a world there, just because of if you do distinctly want to get that playmaking guard. Yeah, I'm not totally settled on too many of the guys they have. I mean, I know Abdi Bashir is a popular name, the guy whose brother, of course, is an Auburn commit out of JUCO. He's a 6'7" guard, but again, a lot more of a three-point shooter. Actually, he led the country in three-point attempts last season, or three-pointers made, last season.
Is he a point guard though?
That's what I'm saying. I don't think
I
don't think that's a like for like. Like, I'm just again going off of some of these names. So there's a world where maybe if LeBaron goes, the guy you get to replace him isn't necessarily in the portal yet. We're doing a lot of speculating here.
I think either way, just mentioning some of the players, it is a huge year for Aden Holloway. If we were doing a roster importance factor, I think I would go Holloway number 1, Aden Sherrill number 2. In terms of who's the most important player to this roster. Because right now, I mean, you're going to need Aden to be the point guard, to be the guy. And so even if you do bring in a point guard, I think you're going to need Aden to kind of be on that, that stage of, I said a little bit about Jaren, as guys that need to grow up and it sounds so harsh when I say it, right? But like guys that need to kind of step up their game to that elite level. We've seen it from Aden. I think he can do it. But I guess, yeah, the two Adens would be my number 1 and 2 most important players for next season.
Yeah, they're both going to be very important. I think from a scoring perspective, I think Nate Oates is taking the right approach in when you lose someone like Mark, you're not going to replace him with just one guy. But yeah, for sure from a that 3-level scorer ability, and yeah, if he can improve in any of the creative stuff, if he can improve as a defender, there's leaps and bounds he can still make for sure. And I think, yeah, as a starter in that lineup, I think he's going to be big. So yeah, still a lot of offseason to go. We'll see what happens with LeBaron Philon, Darion Reed, Jaren Stevenson, what they ultimately decide to do and how that affects, any future portal acquisitions for Alabama. But I like the 3 additions that they've made. Obviously, Jalil Bethea being the latest one, the freshman coming out of of Miami. Plenty to watch for hoops, Tony. But segueing back to some spring football to finish off the show. We obviously have A-Day coming up in a week from when we're recording this on Sunday, or actually, excuse me, less than a week. It's on Saturday. Can't keep my dates right, but coming up in less than a week, Alabama will end their spring with A-Day. But they did have another scrimmage, Tony, and I know you talked to some people who discussed what happened at the scrimmage and had some good notes. And I'm going to start with where we're probably going to start with until the end of the offseason when this quarterback finally gets announced. What did you hear? Alabama had its second spring scrimmages on Friday. What did you hear about the quarterback specifically to start and how they performed in their second scrimmage of the spring?
Yeah, I think that there was things to like from all of them. It wasn't as one-sided as the scrimmage number one, where it was clearly Ty was the best guy out there. I think that Ty still had a solid scrimmage. I think I heard from somebody that they tried to chart him, and he was something like 12 of 19 with a touchdown and an interception. I heard that, Ty Simpson kind of started the scrimmage really hot and then kind of maybe settled down. And then, so you want to see more consistency from him. But I thought, it was also encouraging to hear that he had another touchdown with Isaiah Horton. So in two scrimmages now, from our sources, granted we weren't there, but I have pretty good sources at the scrimmages. He's connected with Horton for 4 different touchdowns in 2 scrimmages. So that's positive. Obviously, both times they were scrimmaging without Ryan Williams. So it is good to see, a future, probably the probable starting quarterback build some chemistry with the new Miami transfer, who looks like Alabama got the real deal with him.
Miami transfers. How about him? Am I right?
I know, right? Yeah, we're talking, 2 different sports, but Keelan Russell is the person that I would say, I think, drew the most praise. I think partially just because he's the shiny new toy, but somebody called him a freakazoid. They said he was at the same talent level as, Tua and Bryce when they came in, and they really like him. He threw a nice 30-yard seam pass to Derek Meadows for a touchdown to another freshman. So freshman to freshman there. Look, with Keelan, he's working more with the second and maybe what you would call the third team. It's not as defined as that, but, he's not taking as many first-team reps. I'm not even sure if he took a first-team rep from what I heard in the second scrimmage, but he is performing well, and he's making some big-time throws. It's one of those things that I think Ty Simpson is going to get the starting nod. I'm pretty confident in that, but if he gets hurt or if something slips up, Keelan's going to be right at it, and I think he's right there. I would almost, just from the 2 scrimmages I've heard, and I'm not trying to take this with a grain of salt, but I think Keelan's kind of trending towards that number 2 line. Maybe not so much in terms of order and reps, but in terms of who's been the most impressive. I will say that Austin Mack has taken more first-team reps than Keelan, and first-team reps are more important than second-team reps. Austin Mack kind of had what I heard was a little bit of kind of more of a forgettable scrimmage. He threw a few picks. One of them, I think he only threw necessarily 1 pick at least, but there was another pick where he was technically tapped down, but he got rid of the ball anyways, and then that was picked off. From what I heard from Austin Mack, there's a few throws that, he wishes he could have had back. They're dealing with a lot of pressure. The defense, from what I heard, ran a lot of 0 blitzes. So, just kind of all out blitzes and
Coming after
really,
him.
really kind of making these quarterbacks work. I think that's probably smart, for both parties, work on getting some of those aggressive, the way Kane Womack likes to play aggressive. And then also I think it's good to throw some fire at some of these young quarterbacks, see how they respond. I'd much rather, from an Alabama standpoint, Austin Mack getting flustered and throwing an interception in a spring scrimmage than I would, if he has to step in during the fall. So there's still things to like from him. I wouldn't necessarily rule him out either. But that being said, of the 3, I'm still leaning towards Ty. If he continues to do, to just not mess up, really. I mean, I think he's got so much experience. Obviously, you want to see him have the 3 touchdown day that he had in the first scrimmage, rather than the 1 touchdown, 1 interception day that he had in the second scrimmage. But I think if he just kind of maintains where he's at and steadily gets better, I think that he's going to be your starting. He's going to take that first snap against Florida State.
It's obviously a lot to interpret too from just 2 scrimmages, and there's I'm sure even more progression all 3 of them are making, but obviously good signs for Ty Simpson, seemingly good signs for Keelan Russell too, and that's where I want to segue to is obviously with the exception of Keelan Russell, I'll rule him out for this discussion. You talked about a couple of the other freshmen on both sides of the ball. We've heard a lot of good things from some of these 2025 class guys. How involved they'll actually be when the fall comes, who knows? But who are 2 guys to you? Maybe pick one on either side of the ball that you heard stood out here in this second scrimmage, and maybe a couple names it seems like that we're hearing, consistently kind of trend as the spring goes on here.
Yeah, I mean, Dejoun Lee, the 5-star cornerback, is like 6'4". He's like way too big to be a cornerback, but he's not too big to be a quarterback, but he's bigger than your average cornerbacks. He actually started across from Davian Brown in place of Damani Jackson, who's hurt. I think that he's a guy that is he probably would have won your MVP of the scrimmage if they were awarding that. So the interception that I was talking about with Austin Mack, that it was ruled down and he threw an interception, that was picked off by Dejoun Lee. So if you want to count that as an interception or not, technically I think in the made up stat book it would not be an interception, but he did make a play on a ball, that was treated like a live ball and came up with an interception. But even outside of that, we'll take away his pseudo interception. He had he had 2 fumble recoveries and a sack, from what I've heard. So they were blitzing a lot. Yeah, you kind of like his size blitzing, if that's what they're going to do. I think he's a guy that, look, I don't think he's going to start day one just because Alabama has, Damani Jackson and Xavier Brown. But I think that, Dejoun Lee is going to find his way on the field, whether it's as maybe he could come in and play that Husky position. He's big enough to do it. Or you're just going to have to, you saw how much they rotated the cornerbacks in and out last year. I think you're probably going to do some of that again this year. And I think he's a guy that's showing that he can play at that level. And the good thing for Alabama is you got a guy like that as a freshman. You don't have to necessarily throw him into the fire as much as you had to throw Xavier Brown into the fire last year. You can kind of ease him in a little bit. And, but he's going to, I don't care where Dejoun Lee plays, whether he eventually moves back to safety, whether he plays Husky, he's going to see the field the way he's playing. And it's really encouraging. And then the other guy I keep on hearing about is Latsier Brooks. And he's kind of like, he scored a touchdown from what I heard on a little swing pass. I think he's the guy that could be like a gadget player. I think he's wearing the number 17. Is that right? He's going to draw a lot of those Jalen Waddle comparisons. I don't know if that's fair. Probably let's shy away from those from him for his sake. But he is a quick, crafty receiver. I think they can do a lot with him. I think they can put him in different packages. Maybe put him in the. I'm not saying like use him as a running back, but like kind of do some kind of nifty, crafty stuff with him. And then use him as a slot receiver. I think that, you have a young quarterback with an offensive line that's still kind of sinking together that might, have some early growing pains. You probably want to get the ball out quick. Ty Simpson's a guy that actually has a relatively quick release, so I think he can get rid of the ball quick. I think maybe you might see Alabama, as good as Ryan Williams and Jeremy Bernard and Isaiah Horton are, you might actually see a little bit of Latsier Brooks, Cole Adams, those guys across the middle, and kind of maybe exploiting some players that can make catches and make plays after the catch. So I wouldn't count out Latsier Brooks as being a difference maker, especially if he continues to play like this, just with his role and just how much you can do and maybe how much he could help out a young quarterback.
He had the really exceptional spin move, I know, in Alabama's little highlight package that they posted, which kind of illustrates what Tony's talking about. And obviously Latsier Brooks, you don't need to do any convincing for me for Latsier Brooks. I've been bought in since day one of his commitment, of course, in that class of 2025 out in New Jersey. So some good signs there. Other quick notes. You mentioned something that caught my eye in your notes about the left guard battle. Obviously, Gino Vandermark, I know, was working with the ones in that first spring scrimmage. Looked like Cam Dewberry was taking that responsibility in the second scrimmage. What do you make of that situation? Is there a battle brewing there, or just your thoughts on that?
There's definitely a battle brewing there. I don't think anybody's got that locked down. I wouldn't write out Gino yet, though. I think he was a little bit banged up. I heard from one person that might have contributed to him taking second teams, although if he's banged up, he's banged up. So also, I think I saw him, maybe it was in the clip or something, or maybe a picture. I think he was also taking some center reps. So if that was the case, then maybe they're trying to get him second team center reps. They're going to go back and forth. When I asked Wilkin Formby about Gino Vandermark, he mentioned he had good things to say, and then quickly also mentioned Cam Dewberry. So I think that's just a battle going back and forth. I think both guys are capable. That's probably going to wage on until the fall. Gino is just a nice guy to have because he could also play the center position if something happened to Parker. He could play either guard position. So he's going to, you have like a swing tackle. He's like a swing interior guy. But I think he's a guy that can do everything. And, maybe they rotate it out too if it's still close. We've seen Alabama do that in multiple years where they've just kind of rotated guys out to keep them fresh. We'll see if that happens. But yeah, definitely a competition's still brewing there. And I think it's going to be brewing for a while.
Yeah, we'll monitor that because obviously two pretty good players. Gino, fun guy to talk to as well. Another quick one on my favorite position group, special teams. You noted some things that were a little bit iffy. I know long snapping and punting in particular. What did you learn there in the scrimmage?
I heard the long snapping was an absolute mess. Now, I will say that they're without the Cal transfer, David Byrd. Is it David Byrd?
Yes.
Yeah, that they brought in. He's a preferred walk-on, and he's kind of like the guy that they had to answer that. And so they don't have him. You would assume that I don't think he had a bad snap during his time at California. So you would assume when they get him back, which I to my knowledge, it's not an injury that's going to keep him out in the fall. That will be answered at least, Normally the long snapper, the thing that they say is if you don't know the guy's name, he's doing a good job. And so I think David Byrd will do a good job of kind of maybe staying incognito and not making those mistakes. The punter position is interesting because Alabama brought in Alex Asperoff, who's hurt, and then they've got Blake Dowd, Colorado Mines transfer, who was really inconsistent from what I heard at the scrimmage. So I think the hope was that you'd have an experienced guy in Blake Dowd. I think we saw him have like an 80-yard punt or something on a clip on. Yeah,
went viral for one.
He didn't have an 80-yard punt during the scrimmage. Let's just say that he was not consistent. In fact, I was told by someone that if I don't know how to say his name.
I think it's Asperuov, but
I'm not sure either. If he's not able to come back, I wouldn't be surprised if depending on the severity of that injury and if Blake Dowd just can't put together consistency, I wouldn't be surprised if Alabama dipped into the portal for a punter this year. Look, I think that's kind of like what they did last spring, where Connor Talty wasn't necessarily dynamite at the kicker position, and they knew that probably needed an extra year, so they brought in Graham Nicholson. They hardly ever use Graham Nicholson, but that's not the point. They brought in an established guy, and I don't know if you're going to get the Ray Guy Award winner. I don't even know if you can get the Ray Guy Award winner.
I'm going to look up who that is, but continue.
Yeah, I think that there will probably be, if Alabama needs a punter, one in the portal. I don't know if they'll have to kind of like tamper. I think everyone kind of does, but if it is known that a playoff contender needs a punter, I think a punter will materialize. How about that? I'm not accusing Alabama of anything, but I think that they'll be able to take care of that need. Is the Ray Guy Award winner? I don't think he's available. I think it's a player that is on.
Don't believe so. I think he is out of eligibility. It is, I'm going to butcher his name, Eddie Zaplicki, I think is how you say it. He was USC's punter last season. Also played for Arizona State. But I believe
it'd be hard to get. It's not like you're getting it. It's not like you're trying to steal from Miami of Ohio anymore. Like I think if he is coming back and he's the Ray Guy Award punter, I think USC has a little bit of money to keep him. That's probably not going to happen.
I believe he is out of eligibility. He's at least played 4 seasons, so
okay.
I don't know how much eligibility he has.
Regardless,
left,
I don't think you're
there you go.
I don't think you're stealing a punter from USC.
I'd love to have some punter talk on the pod. And then the last one,
if they do go punter, and I'm not trying to take the job away from Down or Asperuhoff, but if they do go punter, let's bring in another Aussie. Had a pretty good experience with James Burnup. Let's go down that train again.
has been a proven pipeline to work for Alabama, at least. Eddie from USC is from North Carolina, so he is not an Aussie. So he does not meet that qualification. The only other quick note, Tony and Kalen DeBoer talked about this too after the scrimmage on Friday, was, we talked, there's a lot of injuries Alabama's dealing with. You can go check out Tide Illustrated. We did a little bit of a report, but the position group that may be the most banged up, it seems like, is tight end. What did Alabama do in the scrimmage to deal with that, and who's been out for them?
I mean, they're down to a preferred walk-on and a tackle that they, that they kind of had to switch to even cover the position. They're down to, there was already a group that's losing Robbie Utes and CJ Dupree. Then you had Danny Lewis Jr., who was out for the spring. And then, now they're shutting down Josh Cuevas and Marshall Pritchett. Cuevas is the transfer from Washington from last year, and then Marshall Pritchett's a freshman. So you're like, all you have is Jay Lindsey. He went down at one point during the scrimmage, which left you how many names is that, first of all? That is 1, 2, 3, 4 tight ends that are all injured currently. And
I'll throw another one too. They have another freshman who isn't there yet.
yeah, they do. They with Caleb Edwards. I mean, shoot, he's going to be important because they need bodies. But they were down to Weber State transfer Peter Knudsen, and he was taking some first team reps. And that shows you where you're at. You also had offensive lineman William Sanders. He was taking some just blocking tight end. Like, you need to have someone at the tight end position, and they were running out of walk-ons at that point. So they were putting him in there. That might be a position, I think that might just be an eye-opening thing where at one point you're like, okay, well, how important is the tight end position anyways? Apparently important, because, if it was I don't care how much Alabama uses the tight end position. If this is the regular season and you're down to using a Weber State walk-on and William Sanders as your only 2 tight ends, like, you're in trouble. I think you're at that point probably go into some of these. Are you going to Keon Keeley and being like, hey, you ever thought about playing some offensive reps? Yeah, but I think that I wouldn't be surprised if that's something you see in the spring portal. Maybe not even a flashy name, just maybe somebody that could compete. I think you could probably sell one of those spring portal guys. There's not a lot of proven names. They were able to keep Danny Lewis Jr., but there's not a lot of proven names in the tight end room. Maybe you can sell a guy, that might end up being a backup. He might feel like he can compete for a starting spot, especially with the current injury status of all of them. So that's a position I think that Alabama would probably target, possibly maybe punter. Then you kind of look, you've been putting, guys like Olis Alanin, who had played interior line. He's been playing the left tackle position while Caden Proctor's gone. If you have an opportunity to add another just offensive tackle body, I think that's probably something I'd look at in the spring as well, in the upcoming portal as well. So you just kind of have to see. But no, it'd be interesting to watch for sure.
Yeah, we'll see how the tight end situation, what it looks like on A-Day when we get to watch and who's ends up taking some reps. But I do love in 2025, you still have these, cases where Alabama is down to a Weber State walk-on and a converted offensive lineman just eating bodies. It's very, very funny that can still happen. But obviously, we'll have all that covered going forward. Plenty of build up toward the A-Day game next Saturday. We'll have any basketball offseason news as well. You best believe we'll have everything updated. So go subscribe to Tide Illustrated for that. Give us a sub on YouTube. Give us a like, comment down below. Any thoughts on the hoops transfers, thoughts on A-Day as we look forward here. And give us a follow on Spotify if you're listening as well. We'll have plenty of content coming up. We'll see you next time.